Well, greetings and welcome to episode 79 of Bible 180, 180 episodes between Genesis and Revelation. Today we're on the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness in Matthew chapter 4. We're skipping over Matthew chapter 3 because that tells of the ministry of John the Baptist and him baptizing people as they were coming to the river Jordan to him. Jesus then being baptized by John. That's in chapter 3, and both Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell that same story in a little bit different way. So we'll be covering that when we get to those Gospels. And chapter 4, the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness, is something that's very interesting because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all have the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness as soon as he was baptized. In the Gospel of Matthew, as soon as Jesus was baptized and was ready to begin his public ministry, he was first driven by the Spirit into the wilderness where for 40 days and 40 nights he was tempted by the devil. And at the end of that time, he must have been hungry and his defenses must have been down. And the devil confronts him with three different temptations. His first temptation is to change stones into bread, which Jesus could have done, but he knew that if he focused away from God and trusting God, like we've talked about so many times, that his need would be drawn away from God. And he said with a loud, "No, we don't live by bread alone." He was then tempted by worldly power and offered riches and control over everything if he would just submit to the devil. And Jesus knew that if he gave into that temptation and focused on it and where it would lead, that he would lose his calling not only to be the Son of God, but also lose his calling from saving his people from their sins. And so he said, no, worship God and God only. He was finally tempted to throw himself off the Jerusalem temple to have the angels of God swoop down and save him. So show him something glitzy, the devil said, and you'll be fine. And Jesus sees the trap. He knew that if he focused on testing God and not trusting God, that his life would fall apart. And so he said aloud, no, I'm not going to put God to the test. Now, the temptation stories of Jesus begin Matthew, Mark, and Luke because they knew that as they started their story of Jesus, they needed to talk about temptation because we live in a world full of temptation. Jesus becomes our hope because Jesus overcame the temptations of power and possessions and control over God. Jesus used scripture, prayer, and faith to overcome temptations, and in doing so, he gives us an example of how we can deal with our own temptations, which are often many. Because we're tempted wherever we go, but we're tempted when we deal with people. We're tempted to wonder about whether we should really be truthful, honest, loving, caring with people. We hear things that we might not know to be factual, and we're tempted to believe them, even though there's a voice inside us that say that's just not true. Don't believe those false stories that come at you from all over. We're dragged into the battleground of temptation wherever we go, no matter how young or old we are, no matter how faithful or unfaithful we are. Every decision that we make shows our commitments because our lives are a spiritual battleground for our commitments, our money, our actions, our faith. And it's clear what the final outcome will be because God has already won the war, but the battle for your loyalties continue. God's will and way will eventually prevail, and God's purposes will be accomplished. The outcome of the war, the spiritual war, in the end is assured. But until the end, the battleground for our hearts, our loyalties, our conduct, our character, our conviction The battle continues. And the first step in resisting evil is recognizing that everything that happens in our lives happens on a spiritual battleground for our loyalties. Jesus knew that deeply as he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He knew that, and he offers himself as an example for us to follow. Because, you think about it, temptations to fall away from our Christian commitments are powerful. Temptations to be drawn away from following Jesus are all over, because they give us a false sense of security that everything's going to be okay. And it might seem okay for a while because temptations are seductive. The reality of sin is seductive. Temptations that draw us into sinful behavior are there at every turn in our lives. In some ways, you can't avoid temptation. It's all over. And Jesus takes temptation very seriously. He knows that sometimes we just give in to a little temptation and it's not much. We don't think the consequences are going to be that bad, but the problem is you keep giving in to temptation and it eventually devours your soul and you end up losing yourself, and death is the final inevitable consequence. The natural result of giving into temptation is a downward spiral that inevitably leads to death. That's how seriously Jesus takes temptations, and that's why the gospel writers tell about it right off the bat as soon as Jesus was baptized. So think about it. Ask yourself the question, how do we avoid temptations? How do we as Christians just get the courage to say aloud no when we're tempted to do something that draws us away from Jesus? I think the Bible offers us 3 insights into how to handle temptation. First, be realistic. You're going to be tempted. It's inevitable. Every Christian, all of us are tempted. You never get too old to get tempted. You never get too spiritual to be tempted. In fact, think about this. The more spiritually mature you are, the more you draw closer to God's purpose for your life, the more you'll be tempted. Because if temptation is an attempt to draw us away from God, then the closer you get to God, the more temptations will be there, because sin, death, the power of the devil, whatever you want to call it, sees you as a bigger challenge. You're the big fish that the devil wants on the wall over the fireplace. You want to be that stuffed big fish that the devil wants. The closer you come to God, the more temptation will be there to try to draw you away. And remember, it's not a sin to be tempted. We're all tempted in multiple ways. It is a sin to give into temptation. James says, the book of James, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Meaning that if God has delivered you from evil, don't keep getting tempted by touching something you've already been delivered from. In Hebrews it says, Jesus was tempted in every way like we are, and yet he did not sin. Jesus was tempted, but he did not give into temptation. It's not a sin to be tempted, but it's a sin to give into temptation. Temptation proves you're human, not that you're evil, not that you don't trust God. So first off, in order to avoid and overcome temptation, be realistic. Second thing with temptations is be responsible. Accept responsibility for your temptation. Don't blame others for being tempted and giving into it. It's such a common thing to blame someone else for everything that's wrong in our lives. It's those Democrats, it's those Republicans, it's those Vikings, it's those Titans, whatever it might be. We're a blaming culture. I mean, we live in a culture, I think, of irresponsibility. When we want to blame others, we want to blame the government, society, the environment, our heredity. blame our parents, blame the media, blame the way we were raised, even blame God that God made me this way. I've just got to act that way. You are responsible for the temptations you face if you give into it. You won't hear it on any news stations, but you'll hear it here. You are responsible for yourself and the temptations that you give into. Don't blame God. Don't blame other people. Don't think that if someone was in your position, they would give into the temptation like you did. Don't blame others. Be responsible. And third, be refocused. Remember that temptation begins in our mind. You are responsible for what you put into your thinking. We often behave what we're thinking about. The key to overcoming temptation is to refocus your thoughts. Change your mind. Change your focus. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians, finally, beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, commendable, if there's any excellence or anything worthy of thought, think about these things. Be refocused. Focus on what is true, honorable, and just. Finally, the letter of James deals with temptation right off the bat, right in the first chapter. Here's what James says about it. He says, no one when tempted should say, I'm being tempted by God, for God does not tempt people. But one is tempted by one's own desire, being lured into it and enticed by it. And then when that desire has been conceived, it gives birth to sin. And that sin, when it is fully grown, gives birth to death. That's what Paul says. You know, that's why it's important to decide how you're going to deal with temptation before you even are faced with it. Perhaps you know the morning prayer that goes like this. Dear Lord, so far I've done all right. I haven't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy or grumpy or nasty or selfish or overindulgent. And I'm really grateful for that. But in a few minutes, God, I'm going to get out of bed. And from then on, I'm going to need a lot of help, right? So choose what you're going to focus on and decide that you're not going to give into it. Refocus your head, your heart, your hands, your lifestyle. Refocus it on Jesus. And remember that we've talked about before, what you focus on is where you'll end up. What you believe in your head, you will feel in your heart, you will act out with your hands. So don't let junk into your way of thinking. James says, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. Just put up a bubble wrap around you and say, ain't going to be tempted today. Not today, Satan. We know those t-shirts that say that. Not today, Satan. When you face temptation, you have a clear fork in the road. What you going to do? You decide to go with it, or you decide, not today, Satan. Not me. Not ever. Not now. I am one who says no to those things I'm tempted about, and I say yes to Jesus, to following him. Make it a great day. Decide. That's why you get out of bed in the morning and you decide it's gonna be a great day. You start to focus your mind on the greatness that will come to you. You go to bed at night thinking, I am so grateful for the many blessings of life, for God delivering me into a good sleep tonight. Not everything is good every day. But when you focus on making it a great day, so many greater things will come your way. I look forward to being with you with the next session when we start to talk about the Beatitudes, incredible blessings of Jesus that begin the Sermon on the Mount. You take care. Don't be tempted. And I look forward to seeing you at the next episode. You take care. Bye-bye.